Hi, Sarah and Annabelle here. I have an interesting story to tell you today. A long time ago, I had this experience of, it was a dream, one of those dreams that you know isn't just a dream, where I'm an old man with a long beard and sandals walking in the desert, and I'm a spiritual teacher, and this is my successor and my student walking next to me, and we're going out into the desert, and we're talking to him, and I'm getting ready to leave, and I'm giving him last words, and at the end of it, I start to feel a tingling in my body, and he says, "Elijah, don't leave, I'm not ready." And he says, "Yes, you are ready, and I'm being called home." And in my dream, I started to just tingle and tingle and tingle, and I started rising in the air until I got lighter and lighter, and then this bright light grew, and I rose up and ascended.
Woo-hoo.
So this was this amazing dream, right? So at that point, I thought, Elijah, who the hell's Elijah? So those of you who don't know, I have absolutely no religious training, either Jewish or Christian. I don't know the stories. So I looked it up and I was like, oh my God, he actually did have a student and a successor. He was also a leader, but mostly a spiritual teacher. And he did ascend in the desert. So I thought that was really cool. So more recently, I have some neighbors that are a little bit problematic. They're Catholic Mexicans, and the husband made a pass at me and the wife thinks it's my fault. And one day, I can just feel the resentment coming from her. I'll say hi and she'll go. She won't even say hello. So at one point, I've got my biggest chunk of rose quartz between our properties. Soak it up in there. Thank you very much. So at one point, I just thought, God, what is she thinking with that glare? And I heard in my mind, "You're Jezebel." I went, Jezebel? What was that, right? So I was like, I don't know that story either. So more recently, I was thinking about that just a couple days ago, and I decided to go, well, what is Jezebel's story anyway? I just sort of had an idea that she was supposed to be a whore and a betrayer, right? Right? Perfect. So I went and started reading all these stories about her, what it is. So Jezebel was a princess from a country that worshiped Baal. Basically, they're child sacrificing Satanists, right? And she married King Ahab, who was a Jewish king. And they lived in Israel in this beautiful fertile valley. They had this gorgeous palace, and not far away is the very famous Mount Carmel. So Mount Carmel is a 15-mile long mountain range that you can see the Mediterranean Sea to the west and this beautiful fertile valley to the right. And in the valley, the King Ahab had sort of like a hunting or summer residence. Well, next door was a guy who had a property, a vineyard. And King Ahab decided he wanted to own that so he could have his own garden to supply his palace there. So he went to the guy and he said, I'd be willing to either trade you equally valuable land or pay you a reasonable amount for this land. I want to have it. It's right next to me. And the guy said, that's against God's law. Evidently, the Torah says, if you have land in your property, it has to stay in your property. You're not supposed to sell it. The only way it can be taken from you is if you're a traitor to the king. So, and then it's only taken for 50 years. Right?
Don't give the show away, no.
Oh yeah. So they and then after 50 years, if you are a traitor, then it still reverts back to your children. So Ahab is upset. He says they didn't eat for a while and all that, and he tells Jezebel, and she says, "Don't you worry, darling, I'll take care of this for you." So she gets her cronies and she writes up these letters and puts his signature and puts his signal sign, whatever, his stamp on it. And he has them go out and accuse this vineyard owner of treason against the king and also religious treason, basically. So
it's a heretic.
It's a heretic, right? They stone him to death. And the king takes the land, right? So meanwhile, this guy, Elijah, he'd said some bad things about the king before. And so the king he'd been hiding in a cave, and the king sent out men to try to find him. Well, somehow Elijah finds out what happened here, and he shows back up. And so he says to the queen, "Meet me on top of Mount Carmel, which can be seen from so many just places all around. It would be visible to all the people, right? And I want you to bring 450 of your spiritual leaders of your Baal child sacrifice worship, and another 450, it was a total of 850 of Canaanite people, I think it was. And meet me up here and we'll have a competition to see whose God can start a fire.
And
so they all
just interrupt you there. So the Canaanites, I think, were the ones that worshipped the golden calf. So it was along the Satanist lines as well. Like we got Baal Canaanites, but I think they were along a similar vein.
Yeah. And I may have the name not quite right, but they were also Satanists and child sacrifice. Elijah makes the bet. You 850 come up here, and just me alone, I will call upon my God, and we'll see whose God is the true God. And that's the bottom line answer on this one test. So the 850 guys that pile up the wood, they dance around, they pray to their God. Nothing happens. Elijah's tapping his foot. And then they go into what's described as orgies. And then they start cutting themselves and dripping the blood. And Elijah gets kind of sarcastic and says, oh, maybe your God's having a nap. Be a little louder, wake him up. Maybe he's in a conversation with another God and just can't hear you. Come on, you can do better than that. And then he gets kind of tired of it, I guess, or it's all scripted, who knows. So he says, I'm going to go. He goes to another spot. He rebuilds what had been a temple. So he puts the big old stones back in place while they're still over there cutting themselves and whatever they're doing. And then he piles up some wood on it. And then he has like a trench, a circular trench dug around it. Then he orders some of his assistants to go to the stream, or I guess it's a natural well type of thing, get 4 buckets of water each, pour them over the wood, over the temple, and so much it flows out and makes like a moat around it, right? And then he prays to God, and all of a sudden a bolt of light, a fire roars out of the sky and starts it on fire, at which point proves my God's the real God. And then he orders, yeah, baby, told you so. So he orders all 850 people put to death.
Woo! Cleanup time.
Yeah. So it's made me think, this has been going on for a long time. And the other thing is Elijah talked a lot about, he ascended, right? And it's written about it as an ascended person. And he also talked a lot about a Messiah and the coming age and things like that. So because when I first had my first dream, more of a vision of the event, which is the waves of, it looks like this is the best drawing I could do of it, but pastel, ever expanding interference waves coming across the sky from the hills behind me. And then when it got to me, this tingling started, and it got so intense. It's a very, very pleasant tingling. It's like gas you get at the dentist, and the best orgasm you ever had, only everywhere. It's like, right?
Yeah.
And while I was doing that, I had this sudden thought of like, oh, wait, I remember that dream. I don't want to ascend yet. I still want to be here. I got kids. And I kind of shut it down. So what occurred to me just in contemplating this information I'd learned and so forth is, 1, I'm still fighting the Satanists. 2, that the event is the return of the Christ consciousness.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Does that feel right?
It does, because in the Bible, they often talk about the second coming of Christ. You often hear Christians talking about that. Oh, Jesus is coming back. And there was on Spirit Library, where you were also a guest writer, spiritlibrary.com is a lovely site full of very high integrity channelers. And somebody on there at one point had said, this is Jesus, talking away. I'm not coming back, by the way. And you're doing fine without me. You're doing great. So you don't need me to be there. And I'm like, okay, well, here I am. I just taken all little pieces of information and see what makes sense, what feels right to me. And you just continue to do that through the years. That's what I do anyway. But I thought, all right, that's an interesting view. Then I had to do on radio, I did a Christmas special. usually you just talk about composers and, musicians and things. But I thought, no, let's have a look at Christmas. Let's see a bit more about that. So I looked into the history of Christmas and the chopping of the Christmas tree and things like that. And it said that Christ, the word came from Christella, Christa, which meant enlightenment, and Allah, people are not going to like that, but it means of God, enlightenment of God. And that's when I started thinking, what if the second coming of Christ is for a blanket, for everybody at the same time to rise to that situation where they are a Christed consciousness. Because when Jesus was born, he was Jesus of Nazareth, which is how you would explain surnames in those days. And when he became Jesus Christ, it wasn't a surname. It was because he had become Christed in his consciousness. And which means that there were probably others that were Christed as well in history. When you look at not just the ones that we know about, but just there's always been a few on the planet all the way through all this time that have kept the vibe up a little bit all the way along. Most of which didn't have an ego. They didn't have anything written down. They taught and they healed and they did everything that we know Jesus did. But they've always been those people around. And so to lift everybody at once, that's
embodying it.
Makes a lot of sense.
So it occurred to me, and I was thinking about it, and I saw a random tweet from a really cool person who channels. You're all ascended masters already, by the way. You're not working for that. You people who are awake and know what you're doing, it's because you already did it, and you came here to finish it up and do the final thing. And I was thinking, well, the event, the changing from the old earth to the new earth, the 3D to 5D, or however you want to look at it, right? And we're all carrying our piece of Christ. And the other thing that sort of connects to it is, at one point, I was having a healing session with a gal who's super psychic, and she said, wait a minute, were you one of the disciples? She said, yeah, and I could feel that this felt true. And she named some names, and I thought, how can I be that? Because I know specifically, I already knew that I had been alive then, but I knew that I'd never met Jesus in the face. And so she went through it, and one sense she said Paul, and she got a yes answer, as I did too, but I heard, no, it's Saul. And like I said, I don't know any of these stories. And I went and looked it up, and Saul became Paul, and he never met Jesus. And at first he fought them. And I also was confused because when I delved into that consciousness, I thought, wait a minute, I hate this guy and I hate that woman. And he's homosexual, by the way. So he didn't like women anyway. Mommy issues, And I couldn't believe, how could it be that one of these apostles hated this guy? So I was really confused until I looked it up. But what I got when I started doing meditations on it was that the Christ seed that Jesus and Mary brought would have just fizzled out in a few hundred years at the most if Paul hadn't put this coating on it. He made it so that you didn't have to follow the rules, like you didn't have to be circumcised in order to be in this new religion, right? All this stuff. And he spread it far and wide. And I think he was eventually martyred for it too. But he put this coating on it so the seed could spread far and wide. And like a lot of seeds, it wasn't until there's enough friction to rub off the coating that the true sprout can come out. And have we not been under friction, folks? Think about it. So even though he distorted it, it's called Pauline Christianity. I mean, he really wrote a lot of it.
There's a verb for Paul.
Yes, very much so. So then I was thinking, well, how is it I could have ascended in 28 BC, but then been such an asshole at 1 in 30 AD, whatever, or 70 AD. But then I remembered the visuals from the book I read from the 70s, written by Jane Roberts, Education of Oversoul 7, that the way he described it was, here's the timeline, and here's this century, next century, next century. You can pop in here, and then you can pop in here, and you can pop in here. Yeah. Because I also remember a lifetime in the 1700s, right before the French Revolution. And boy, I was a woman, and I was just like one of the, courtier. and having a lot of sex and drugs and rock and roll. It was like, but that was just a few centuries ago. So I think,
yeah,
maybe, I popped back to 2800 BC, right? And then finished it out, and then came forward to this one so that we could get everybody in the show.
Yeah, so there's a few things that make me think of that. First of all was a description I've had that time is not linear. It's more like standing on a mountain and looking out over a plain.
Yeah.
And over that plain is incredible detail, because they're single frames of a film, it's not like, oh, there's one life and there's another life, and it doesn't really matter where they show up on the timeline, but they all exist, they coexist at the same time. But also within that life is every choice that you could possibly have made. So it's like a little fuzzball, you might say. All these other timelines, alternative timelines that you could have taken, should have taken, would have taken, didn't quite take, all of those exist around that life and make up a tapestry, is another description I had, where you can see ripples where people have messed up and they cause a ripple in the timeline, and then, whether you either mend it, come back in together, or you can't lift it out, you've got to mend it. I know I'm giving you several different analogies here, but yeah, this is where past life is probably not the best term for it. Resonant lives is the thing. And because there is no separation between all of us, this is how you can end up with 50 women who say, oh yes, I was Anne Boleyn, where you resonate with a life along the plane, across the plane, but others may resonate with it as well. And you can all learn from that. So if we get to this point where we are Christed, where the event happens, and we leave behind some people, they miss out. They're not ready. They haven't done the work. They have the opportunity to go back into the past of the planet to learn and resonate with a life that's already happened in the past. Or like you say, just pop into that time zone and start learning from that era, because they won't be able to do it in the future. From here forward is a totally new epoch, a different kind of world.
Mm-hmm. Pretty exciting.
There's also the idea that came through Spirit Library that this ascension will be the first of its kind where there are still people on the planet. That usually you wipe out everybody on the planet, then you raise the planet gets to upgrade, woohoo, because it is a spirit, a soul in itself. She gets to ascend, and then you put the people back on and you start again. But this is the first time we'll be doing it with bodies on it, which is why it's such a struggle to get through the ascension symptoms and irritability and illnesses coming out and all the rest.
Right. Well, that's my stories for today. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, see ya.
Bye.